read or vote. In a moment, Benjamin Baruch back with us. We're going to talk about biblical prophecy. The day of the Lord has come, and what this all means to our financial life. Next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Benjamin Baruch with us, professional financial advisor, author, public speaker. He is a chartered financial analyst and a certified public accountant and acts as a financial advisor to some of the largest privately held real estate companies in America. His academic background includes studies in international finance and economics at UCLA and graduate studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem on the history and psychology of the Middle East as well. Benjamin, welcome back. How have you been?
I've been good. Great to be back.
I've always wanted to say that. Benjamin, how you been?
Well, I've just finished my 7th book, and it was an 8-week marathon of about 100 hours a week, and so I'm catching up on the sleep that I missed. But I'm fine, thank you.
How did you tie biblical prophecy in with your financial studies?
Well, the very first class I had at UCLA in economics, the professor that taught it was actually the dean of the economics school. And the first lecture was on the events that led up to the Great Depression. And he explained how the Federal Reserve did exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right time in order to make the Depression as bad as possible. And he ended the lecture with a statement, you can either believe that the men running the Fed were basically idiots who didn't know what they were doing, or they intentionally created the Great Depression. And you can have your opinion and I have mine. And, it was obvious he was telling us the Depression was created by Fed policy. And I began to go to office hours every week, and I had the professor to myself most of the time. And at the end of each meeting, I would ask him, Professor, you're this expert in international finance, you're world-renowned. You must be aware of the existence and the operations of an organization known as the Order of the Illuminati. Please talk to me. I know from your first lecture you understand the system's being rigged. Please talk to me. Tell me what you know. He denied any knowledge, basically threw me out of his office for about 8 straight weeks, and I finally broke him. And he admitted to me, if I talk about this, I could be killed. And so that began my inquiry into the history of how the deep state had manipulated the Western economies for the last 500 years of recorded history. And sure enough, they used this 80-year cycle of depression, collapse, followed by reflation, followed by a time of expansion and growth. They convinced the public the way to get rich is to go into debt. They create inflation where the interest rates, basically, not really a true interest because inflation is lifting the value of everything. And then they suddenly constrict credit. The house of cards collapses. They run the table. It's like a 7 on the craps table, and they do it about every 80 years. So, they really are very closely related because the operation of this deep state is, in fact, the central focus of much of Bible prophecy.
You were back with us in November of 2019. COVID hit in December of that year, but you told all of us that the world would change forever in around March of 2020. And when you add COVID into the equation after the fact, which you didn't know about at the time, it has made a dramatic change to this planet, hasn't it?
Well, the reason I knew the world would change forever in March was because we had entered the 70th year of America as Mystery Babylon, the ruling superpower of the earth, under the reign of the Chaldean deep state. There was a silent coup d'etat that occurred in the post-World War II era. A deep state acquired de facto political control of both political parties through ownership of the media, ownership of our global corporations. And the first full year of their reign was 1950. The very first thing they did is they threw a party and distracted the American public. But I knew the 70th year of America's rule as the leading superpower of the earth was beginning in 2020. And I understood that they were going to begin the takedown of the country. The third day of spring, which was March 22nd in 2020, is the first satanic ritual day. It's known as the Burning Man Feast, and it's where they essentially burn human sacrifices to ensure the success of their endeavors for the year. I knew they would do something big. I had no idea what it was, but I knew there would be a dramatic event that would occur on March 22nd. I didn't bother to mention the date on your program, even though I knew the date. I didn't want to put it out on such a huge audience. But, yeah, they came through. They locked the world down. And, what's interesting is the Burning Man ritual, which is the very first satanic feast for each new year. It's their version of the Passover. A number of the satanic ritual feast days are actually black upside-down versions of the high holy days of the Bible. And so the Burning Man ritual replaces the Passover. During the Passover, God's people are set free. In the Burning Man ritual, the innocent are sacrificed. And in this case, the innocent were locked down into medical slavery. So, quite ironic, but quite clearly the first step towards the imposition of a new world order had begun. And we're still in the process, George.
We sure are. The name of your new book is called The Day of the Lord Has Come. Give us a little synopsis of this.
Well, it's a summary of where we are in human history, and we are at the threshold of the global crisis that will create the opportunity for a one-world government to rise in power following World War III. We are on the verge of World War III. Nobody's talking peace. All of the NATO countries are continuing to push, poke the bear. This war will accelerate. The war in Gaza is merely phase 2. It will accelerate to a war with Hezbollah momentarily. Israel has recently bombed Yemen. They've recently been told there's going to be a massive response by Yemen. Iran will get involved at some point over the summer. North Korea is the planned third front. At that point, the world will begin to become afraid. The UN will, at some point, order a mandatory ceasefire, and there'll be peace talks. The world will think a time of peace is returned. Our enemies will resupply and reposition their forces for the final conquest, which is the attack and the invasion of the United States, and that event will occur in the next 6 or 7 months, George. And I'm not going to give any dates, although there is a date that I've identified that I think fits perfectly the Chaldean calendar. But I think, maybe as a starting point, I'd like to explain how this information evolved, because at the beginning of this year, I began to see new insights into the Bible prophecies that all circled the year 2024 for the year in which the world will change forever. And the first of those was a parable which Jesus taught, the parable of the fig tree, in which he told his disciples the generation that sees the restoration of the state of Israel would see the fulfillment of all things. Of course, Israel was reinstated in 1948, 1949. The only question was, how long is a generation? And people have argued and speculated on that answer. And, for the last 50 years, people have been debating, well, what exactly is the life of this generation? In early January, my eyes were open, and I realized, wait a minute, Jesus said the generation that saw these things, that could only be the generation alive at this time. I thought, why don't I just look up the life expectancy of the people of Israel today? And it's 82.7 years. Now, in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 49, King David wrote that he would unveil the key to a parable within the Psalms. So the answer to Jesus' parable is hidden somewhere in the book of Psalms. And so I prayed and I asked the Lord, is 82.7 the correct answer? And if so, where would that answer be unveiled within the Psalms? Well, the answer is simple enough. Psalm 82, verse 7. And Psalm 82 deals with God's judgment at the end of the age. Verse 7 states, of the people of Israel, you shall die as men. Well, how do men die? Based on life expectancy. So 82.7 is the key to the parable of the fig tree. Israel was reborn in 1948, 1949. If we take 49 and we add 82.7 years, we end in the December of 2031. We know the events of the end of the age occur in the season of fall, so that would put the second coming at the latest in the fall of 2031. We know World War III takes place in the season of fall. 7 years prior, the Israelis will burn the weapons for 7 years. That's in Ezekiel 39. That would put World War III in 2024. Well, we do have a war going on, and it is expanding. And, we're at the point where we have taken enough actions that the Russian government is talking about the U.S. as an active participant in the war in Ukraine. The Russian government is talking about the possibility of a first strike using atomic weapons against the United States. This is not some theoretical, crazy idea. The Russian government has changed their nuclear policy to basically allow them to use nuclear weapons to end this war that is threatening their nation. So, we're on the doorstep of World War III, and the bad news is the war is going to take place in the next 6 months, probably sooner. The good news is our country, a significant number of its people will survive. We will actually prevail. It is not all bad news, but we've got really dark days ahead of us. Interesting take. And what about China and Taiwan? Well, Taiwan is a diversion. If you listen to some of the speeches that have been captured, I've included these in the book. They openly admit Taiwan is merely a diversion. They're planning on attacking the United States. It'll be Chinese ground troops that are ultimately land, and up to 2 million of them are going to come ashore following the nuclear strike. There's at least 150,000 Chinese troops in country today. They've come right through the southern border. We've got troops from several other countries that are pouring in. We've got hardened criminals from the prisons of Central and South America being released. They're all pouring into our country that no longer has a border. And, when this war begins, we'll have a virtual army inside the continental United States. And so, our country is in a very precarious position. And, it's going to look like we've lost this war.
Hold on for a second, Benjamin. We're going to take a short break, but we'll come back and chat more about your work next. And welcome back. George Norrie with you, Benjamin Baruch with us. Benjamin, will the November presidential election have any bearing on some of these things you've talked about?
Well, I don't think they're going to change the outcome, and we may not even see an election.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, there's certainly the potential of it being suspended because of a crisis that would hit us before the election. The war might actually come before the election. If Trump were to win, though, the war will be here before he's inaugurated. That much is guaranteed. The deep state understands the system is collapsing. The national debt when Reagan took office was $1 trillion. Today, interest on the national debt is over $1 trillion. There's no way for the U.S. to ever pay off the debt. The deep state is going to use the war as the reason for the default of the United States of America. The West started this crisis in Ukraine in 2014 when they signed the Minsk agreement, but they had no plans to ever honor it. Instead, they used this agreement as a window of time to develop and build a Ukrainian army. But this world war is the perfect excuse to default on the global debt system. They know it's going to collapse anyway, and they use the war as the pretext for why this beautiful socialist system of perpetual indebtedness ultimately imploded. It'll be blamed on the war and not the fact that they bankrupted the world. Today we have chaos everywhere, and the war is planned for several fronts before it turns into a global war. The U.S. is facing a default, George. There's no way out of this. It's only a matter of when, and they're going to use the war to camouflage the default. The nations of the world have been buying our debt in exchange for all of the products they sell to the United States. And everybody realizes the game's over. The U.S. sanctions on Russia fractured the global economic system into two trading blocks. Now you've got the BRICS nations building their own settlement system to rival the SWIFT system. And a number of countries saw the sanctions on Russia and thought to themselves, I got to get my money out of the U.S. banks, because if the Americans get mad at me, they'll take my money and sanction my country as well. So, we've pushed a little too far, and we're in the last innings of the game. And the world war, which, George, the orders have been given. This is not a question of, is this going to happen? No. The orders have been given. Both sides have decided we're having this world war. And, the only question is, how fast does it accelerate?
Nobody wins, Benjamin. Nobody wins.
Well, sure they do. Why do you say nobody wins?
If it's a nuclear exchange, who wins?
Russia wins. The deep state wins. China wins. Our enemies think they win. You're referring to the idea that there's going to be a nuclear winter and that there's going to be this global environmental collapse, which is, Putin constantly talks about there's not going to be any winners. Well, listen, it was Russian meteorologists who created those bogus climate models, and they were created 30, 40 years ago. There's been advancements in the development of fusion bombs, and we have environmentally friendly green nuclear weapons today. The environment will not be destroyed. There will not be a nuclear winter. That was all propaganda designed to deceive the Western population that such a war could never occur. But, in reality, no, the war can occur. If these weapons are used properly, there's very little environmental damage. The country that's going to lose is the United States, and we will suffer significant losses, but we will not be defeated. And in Bible prophecy, it's very clear the survivors in America will turn back to the God with whom we made covenant when this country was first founded, and the Lord is going to rescue the remnant in America. So it's, there is actually a reason to hope if you're an American who's also a believer. If you're an atheist, you might want to start reading your Bible. If you don't know the Lord, call on his name, ask him to reveal himself. If you don't have faith, ask for faith as a gift. He gives it to his people. If you call on his name in truth and in righteousness, he'll respond. But, yeah, we're facing a pretty grim situation, George. I mean, a recent security report by the National Defense Strategy Commission stated the U.S. military could suffer unacceptably high casualties and the loss of major assets, think aircraft carriers, military bases. It might struggle to win or perhaps even lose a war against China or Russia. We are particularly at risk of being overwhelmed should the U.S. military be forced to fight on two or more fronts simultaneously. In conclusion, we wish to be crystal clear about one thing. The cost of our failing to meet America's national defense needs will not be measured in abstract concepts like the loss of international stability or global order. They will be measured in American lives, American treasure, and American security and prosperity that will be lost. American military superiority is no longer assured, and the implications for American interests are severe. And they were questioning how we would possibly handle a war against Russia and China combined. What happens if you throw in North Korea, Iran, Mexico, Pakistan, Syria, Iraq, Nicaragua, Venezuela?
Don't our allies come to our help?
No, they do not. We are abandoned. The only one that comes to our help is Jesus Christ. And it's the only reason this nation will survive this war. And it's in Bible prophecy. In Jeremiah 50, verse 44, the Lord says, I will make them suddenly run away. And who will appoint me the time? The Lord will intervene. It will look like we have lost completely. And at that point, the remnant that's left alive is going to be praying, and the God of heaven is going to intervene. George, this nation was founded on a covenant with God. The Mayflower Compact was signed in the presence of God, amen. And the signatures all promised their loyalty to each other and to the God of heaven, and that they agreed that this nation would be founded to glorify